spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is a special edition of Outspoken. All week, we are counting down the 50 worst of 2024 with my favourite members of the Outspoken family. Today, Connor Tomlinson, host of the New Culture Forum's Deprogrammed podcast and Tomlinson Talks on Lotus Eaters, joins me. But please do subscribe to our brand new independent news source. Turn on the notification bell, then you'll be alerted to our new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. The best way to support Outspoken is by subscribing to a monthly paid membership for access to the uncancelled after show. That returns Monday to Friday in the new year. But as part of the Substack paid subscription, you also get my exclusive reporting and columns, access to our live chats on the Substack app, and the chance to join a thriving community, support independent journalism. Most important, actually, Substack is a safe space, free of censorship. Your support from just £5 a month gives you that extra content, but allows me to continue making Outspoken. Let me tell you, though, you can subscribe completely for free. I understand how tough times are. I just want your support. Let's get this conversation going. Thank you for being with me throughout 2024. But now, let's go. Connor Tomlinson, great to have you here. Great to have you as part of Outspoken in 2024. What a year it's been for you.
I know what a year it's been for you, Dan. It seems like ages ago when you first told me that you were setting up this independent media enterprise, and how it's grown. I'm really glad to see that it's taken off.
Thank you so much. And what does this festive season mean for you, Connor? You're a traditional guy.
Well, I spend a hell of a lot of time with my new missus. Hopefully we're getting married sometime early in the new year. So this
Congratulations. That's actually probably been the biggest thing in 2024 for you. You've got to say that either way, Connor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. She's an absolute joy. This is going to be my last Christmas in my family home because as a Zoomer, I am stuck in the box room despite having moved out once or twice for university and jobs and the like. COVID really took a hit to my finances. So I'm going to be spending Christmas with my parents, my grandparents, my sister, who I'm sure is delighted that I'm still at the table, and my missus right before we move into a place of our own.
And a wedding in 2025?
Yeah, it's going to be a real difficulty to organise, but I'm sure the honeymoon will make it all worth it.
But of course, you also got your own show this year too.
Yes, no, that's been delightful. I understood that I was chewing the ears off of my co-hosts on the podcast The Lotus Eaters far too much. And the excellent thing about Lotus Eaters is that we've never had an editorial line taken. There is a plurality of opinion, especially since I joined. They didn't really have a very socially conservative, let's say, practicing meaning attempting Catholic opinion there. And then since I've come along, I've represented that part of the audience. And so I thought, why don't I just take myself off to the studio once a week and for 90 minutes do an elaborate research presentation about everything that's on my mind. And fortunately, it seems to have found a loyal viewer base. So I'm privileged and delighted to be doing that.
And your interview with Liz Truss caused the MSM to go into complete meltdown.
Yeah, well, that's been one of the delights of this year as well. One of the unexpected delights, not just meeting my missus and getting engaged, but also befriending a former prime minister, despite a media cancellation storm attempting to have her disavow absolutely everything we've ever done, despite us doing nothing wrong. I mean, I was a Conservative member at the time, no more, because I decided to speak out against gender transitions, something that you'd think a Conservative would do. Speaking to a former Conservative prime minister, I think they just got their pants in a twist because they realised that their monopoly on the means of communication has been broken by, fortunately, the likes of you and me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, though, Connor, because I'm not going to forget the politicians or the public figures who have been brave enough to support the independent media from the off. Liz Truss is one. Robert Jenrick is another, because that matters. It shows to me that they have their eyes open. They know that the world's changing. They have to look outside the mainstream media. But wow, what a huge 2024 for you. Connor, how this works is we are in the countdown now, looking at the 50 worst moments of 2024. And not just moments, people, issues, Unfortunately, there's been a lot of bad, especially in the United Kingdom this year. And let's start the countdown at number 40, when Katie Hopkins was cancelled by the Church of England.
In summary, it says, the church has deeper pockets than you know. Basically, we have unlimited funds to fight you. The next bit gets more nasty. And it essentially, the summation that I've checked with the barrister, the summation is the law is not with you. The establishment is not with you. The law's not on your side. Look at all the people who've been locked up recently. That's what it points to. And then this is the bit that's done this to me from the letter. So I said, look, even if you are going to cancel, could you make some payment so that I can refund people? Everybody's tickets, of course, will be refunded, and the booking fees and everything. So, you know, the whole thing's just a loss, and that's fine. You know what? Money and me, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm unburdened every day. But I wanted to make a little fund, so if you'd booked a hotel or you'd booked a train, I would be able to refund that. And I listed out, so, you know, sales damage, future sales damage, customer costs, customer travel costs. And they came back with, for the avoidance of doubt, these purported losses are vague, unsubstantiated and embarrassing. And that's the bit that's really got me.
So, Connor, we saw a different side of Katie there. And I guess for her, it was so shocking, not only that it was the Church of England, but the brutality of the cancellation. And the thing is, Connor, if you're in the mainstream media, Katie Hopkins is now one of these people who doesn't exist. You just pretend Katie Hopkins doesn't walk this earth. And I think that is really upsetting, but also the great thing about the independent media, because she is still a force.
Yes, Katie's a figure that I have yet to personally encounter in the sphere, so I don't know her very well. But I do, from that clip, just feel very bad for her, because what she seems to be trying to do is return the money back to the people who have paid to go and see her in a very fair and transparent fashion. And the Church of England aren't exactly exhibiting Christian charity in this time, and nor have they over the years, because I refuse to take lectures from the Church of England, not just on the grounds that I have theological quibbles with them, but because Archbishop Welby, obviously he's now resigned and will be replaced forthwith, decided to being charitable about the situation, be inactive about a child predator whose presence he was alerted to for about a decade, all the while he was writing forwards to reports from the Church of England about how we can combat transphobic bullying in schools, affirming the very ideology which has confiscated the ability to have families from some of my closest friends. He was also insistent that the church adopt the nonsensical acronym UKMGMR, which was UK Minority Heritage Global Majority Heritage, something incomprehensible like that, as if Chinese people, Jewish people, and sub-Saharan Africans are all some indistinguishable blob that is oppressed by the white English. And he was also lobbying in very political fashion against the government's Rwanda bill. Now, you and I, though we want to tackle illegal migration, we're going to criticize the bill, as Robert Jenrick did, immigration minister at the time, for being completely toothless and incapable of actually dealing with the problem. But no. He said the complete opposite, that England itself should be some giant ark for everyone around the world to climb aboard while the tides of poverty rise until the entire island capsizes, it seems. So the idea that the Archbishop Welby and the Church of England are some bastions of moral clarity is totally for the birds. And that's why I think the Church of England themselves can't pack out their own church halls with attendees, but Katie Hopkins is probably going to do a better job of getting more people to come to their churches than they can.
Oh, yeah. I mean, she sells out wherever she goes. But the issue is, Connor, getting venues. And I don't know, I guess after what happened to me last year, I've thought much more about Katie, because I did know her. I knew her pretty well during her time in the mainstream media. I was the associate editor of The Sun. She was a columnist at The Sun. I interviewed her a lot. There's an interview of us together on YouTube. I certainly hadn't had my political awakening at that time, but I also never bought into the idea that Katie should be cancelled. And what I find so despicable is that actually when you look at what she was advocating for, Connor, she has been proven completely right. Now, sure, her words can be quite verbose. She is an over-the-top woman in lots of ways. In fact, that's why she's leaned into the idea of comedy, because I think with comedy you can potentially get away with a bit more in terms of offending people. But I do just think, when is the mainstream media going to wake up and realize that people like Katie Hopkins do exist? They are part of society. They have an important voice. Or do you think it just doesn't matter anymore because it's completely irrelevant whether Katie Hopkins is allowed to appear on Question Time or even GB News?
So I came on the scene after Katie's cancellation. That's the only reason for my unfamiliarity with her as a person. I know who she is as a personality from when she used to wind up Holly and Phil Schofield on This Morning Sofa. Yeah, so we've all seen those clips, right? They're humorous stuff. But let's abstract this away from Katie Hopkins and say this about general figures who the mainstream media would not allow on unless to pillory and try to embarrass. I'm thinking, for example, to invoke his name, Tommy Robinson, who is only allowed on the likes of Question Time or on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan to be shouted down and shunned. Now, bear in mind, I think Tommy himself would admit that he hasn't always been the most prudent actor, publicly or privately, and we won't say anything about the film, which has been ruled libelous and now landed him in pretty bad prison conditions, which I don't think are very fitting for a civil case, but there you go. It does seem to me that these people, no matter how imprudent their conduct, have said things that you, I, Douglas Murray have been saying, just perhaps with a bit more measure or in ways which are a bit more palatable to those who gatekeep the mainstream media. Though maybe not you or I, because we're not always on these channels these days. And I do think you end up having to either catch up with the public mood, who are becoming more sympathetic to these figures, particularly as they see their cancellations as being unjust, or you render yourself irrelevant over time, or in a weird way, you're almost reliant on very draconian governments enacting very totalitarian speech laws to try and shut down independent media so that your narrow space as a mainstream channel, but not too fringe that the government doesn't hate you, still exists. And I think that's a very precarious space to occupy. I think instead of trying to make boogeymen out of people like Robinson or Hopkins, or even as we saw this past weekend, depending on when this goes out, me, I think that you should instead listen to people who have been a bit more Cassandra on certain issues and wonder why you didn't quite get it, rather than just denouncing them on behalf of people that will never like you in the first place.
Totally agree. And what I think is the big difference between us, and by us I mean the whole alternative community that sits either on the centre-right or the conservative space. I mean, Ben Habib describes it as nation, or describes people like us as nationists. However you want to describe this group of people, we are very, very different to those who sit in the same space on the left, because none of us are saying that Diane Abbott, Owen Jones, Ash Sarkar, Rebecca Long Bailey should be expunged from society, that we should never hear their views, that they should never be allowed to appear on the media. But as you rightly point out, that's exactly what they have done with the likes of Katie Hopkins and Tommy Robinson. So I think that is a key difference. But look, let's move on in the countdown to number 39, where Jeremy Vine, the new high heel wearing BBC presenter, made a surprising bisexual revelation on his Channel 5 chat show.
And of course, well, you are left-handed. I noticed when you were doing your drawing.
I'm is it bisexual? What is it?
I don't know if you're bisexual. Well, you could be. I don't know, Jeremy. Ambidextrous.
No, but it's not. I can't use both hands for everything.
Right.
I write left-handed, but I would play table tennis right-handed.
Okay.
I think that might be bidextrous.
Bidextrous.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's really boring, actually.
Is it? No. Well,
it's not the same as bisexual.
No, it's not.
Connor Tomlinson. What do you make of Jeremy Vine's, I don't really know how to describe it. I was going to say coming out, but he has said that actually that was a mistake. He didn't mean to say he's bisexual, but he certainly has been prancing around the BBC offices a lot in high heels. Do you embrace him sort of exploring his sexuality publicly like this? His feminine side?
I wouldn't embrace him, Dan, because that's certainly not my sexuality. Look, I think that mediocre self-styled celebrities coming out of the closet and denoting themselves as various forms of sexual and gender minorities. I'm thinking of David Walliams saying that he's non-binary, or Demi Lovato, or Talisa saying that she's demisexual, which for those who aren't well versed in Tumblr gender speak means that she only has intimate relationships with people she has a deep emotional connection with. So she's a woman. I think we are far past the age where this is even interesting nor relevant. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the press tour for Wicked, but these two very vapid women, Ariana Grande, who doesn't look very well, sadly, and this other one who plays Elphaba, it's screaming levels of parody of how obsessed they are with gender and race. And I think as for Jeremy Vine, I mean, whatever assembly line that they plucked him off of, where presumably Matthew Wright comes from, I think he's just doing this to add some spice to his life, because in the age of identity politics of the woke variety, straight white men are figures of hate. And so if you are basically the platonic form of a cyclist, you need to pepper in at least one of the identities of the intersectional totem pole to keep your job. So if you mix out the gender stuff a little bit and maybe allude to the fact that you've had a intimate experience with another fella during your uni days, then you might keep your spot on the BBC and Channel 5.
Totally. I completely agree. I think that's what it's about. Being a straight white man makes you incredibly vulnerable at the BBC. Put some high heels on, all of a sudden you're a little bit safe. I have to say, that was one of my biggest disappointments of the year, though, seeing the Wicked press tour with Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo, because the movie is brilliant. I know you'll have to take my word for that, Connor, but it's not woke, and it's like a proper classic. It really is like the glory days of cinema. And Wizard of Oz is one of my favorite movies of all time, you won't be surprised to know. So I was so disappointed, because I'm like, they should have just kept their mouths shut. This is a press tour which has actually just turned off half the population. But look, let's move on. Speaking of turning off half the population, or maybe more, at number 38, Boots decided to sign up the woman who described the Buckingham Palace balcony as terribly white to front their Christmas ad.
We're out of bows! We are never out of bows. Last one. You thought it was all him.
And Connor, of course, Father Christmas is portrayed as a fat, lazy, old white man doing no work, of course.
Yeah, pale, bale and stale, as James cleverly would say. I think he's probably going to hand Mrs. Claus the divorce papers for next Christmas if she keeps treating him like that. Look, using this woman who, again, described the royal family as terribly white just shows how awfully out of touch most of these companies that are abiding by environmental, social and governance ESG scores are, because they'll insult their customer base, predominantly in this country. That would be the heterosexual, white, indigenous population of England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, in order to get kickbacks from hedge funds who are obsessed with diversity, equity and inclusion. And bear in mind, the global backlash to this shows how out of touch they are. Because when I watched that, and I'd been avoiding it as long as possible because I don't watch terrestrial TV, Dan. I'm pretty much like everyone else my age. When I watched that online, begrudging the fact that I even gave them a view, I left a dislike on my way out the door. I was thinking, right, if you could assemble the most annoying possible cadre of woke, like, avatars, it would be that woman who constantly complains about a lack of racial representation to get herself jobs. When I suggested that on Times Radio, by the way, last year, in a very antagonistic interview with Henry Bonsu, he cut that part out because he's friends with her. So that's quite funny. And then a bunch of sort of
That's
gender...
the mainstream media summed up right there.
There you go. And a bunch of gender-bending transsexuals who are all dressed like villains in the capital city of the Hunger Games. And it's like, yeah, I know what screams Christmas to me. Denigrating Father Christmas and depicting a bunch of people who don't seem to have a healthy relationship with their own self-image, let alone a family that would give them presents, and a woman who decided to insult the entire population of the country and the beloved institution of the monarchy. Yeah, that'll do wonders for wanting to put people in your high street shops, which are seeing footfall free fall in the age of post-COVID. Great idea. Let's see how that works out for you.
But it's the arrogance of it, isn't it? It is the arrogance of a decision like that. And speaking of arrogance, at number 37 on our list of the worst of 2024, Keir Starmer, without any discussion with the British public, waves goodbye to the Chagos Islands. But Farage isn't happy about it.
Thank you. Foreign Secretary, it would appear that the potential judgment, next judgment of a spurious, rather political foreign court matters more than the issue of national sovereignty. And you boast that President Biden likes this deal. Now, the Speaker earlier on said that this House should not be affected by elections that take place in foreign countries. But I wonder, how confident are you, if the 47th President of the USA becomes Donald Trump, that he will approve of this deal, given the importance of our relationship with America?
Yeah. What did you make of this decision, Connor Tomlinson?
Oh, it's clearly just your old anti-white post-colonial theory, completely disregarding the strategic relevance of the islands. I mean, first of all, Mauritius have never actually owned the place. Second of all, Mauritius are on China's Belt and Road scheme. For those who don't know, the Chinese give loans, I think predatory loans, to developing countries around the world, bus out their workers to the place to surveil infrastructure projects. And when the nations default on the loans, the Chinese decide to claim those infrastructure projects as their own. I think it was in Uganda where they decided they own the airport going in and out of the country, for example, when we handed Barbados back over to self-governance rather than being part of the Commonwealth after the empire. The Chinese then immediately came in and snapped it up with investment. And it turns out the Chinese are heavily investing in Mauritius. And so this means if we were to give the Chagos Islands over to Mauritius, there would be a British military base that I think would still stay there. But there's nothing stopping the Chinese just swanning around it and having a good look for themselves. And that would be a strategic disaster if we're in a Cold War with them. I mean, I think that's observable just in the way they steal our intellectual property, that they unleashed COVID on us with zero consequences, that they decide to manipulate our media and buy off various politicians in the US and UK. And so I think Donald Trump will actually intervene in this, because what seems like a domestic matter with politicians who are obsessed with selling off parts of Britain's proud colonial and imperial legacy in order to appease the post-colonial types at the UN has actually become a geostrategic matter that is of interest to the global American empire. And so I think, look, I've had my criticisms of Farage for his softness on certain issues. I still want to see reform be very successful and be an insurrectionary political force against the Uniparty, and I cheer them on as a critical friend. I think this is what Farage would be very useful as the beachhead for the MAGA revolution in America affecting political change in the UK.
2024 was also the year that Philip Schofield, without any sense of shame, decided to make a mainstream media comeback. At number 36 on our list of the worst of 2024, watch this. Philip Schofield has been marooned on an island for a brand new 3-part, very sympathetic Channel 5 show, which is designed to see him return full-time to the entertainment industry. Here is the first look.
I've been cast away on a desert island completely on my own. All I have is camera gear, and I can say whatever I want about whatever I want. It's my chance to tell my side of my story. I know what I did was unwise, but is it enough to absolutely destroy someone?
Phillips.
Connor Tomlinson, it's interesting, isn't it, that we speak about figures like Katie Hopkins, Tommy Robinson, even you and I, being considered completely unpalatable to the mainstream media, yet Philip Schofield, given this big platform on Channel 5 without any explanation as to actually what happened with the young boy.
Yeah, I think given he left under a dark cloud of sexual impropriety, let's put it in a tactical fashion, the idea that he can return without any questions being raised or answered about that, I don't think it shows that the media, let's say they're a big cabal working hand in glove with one another because you can just move from one channel to another. I don't think it shows that they have the most morally upright reputation. Let's put it that way. And also, I think Philip Schofield's a fascinating proxy for the incentive structure, the moral incentive structure of culture at the moment. Because what did he do to get out in front of these allegations of sexual impropriety? Well, he decided to make a big song and dance of him coming out as gay and essentially abandoning his family. And the media paid little to no attention to how this would affect his wife and children. Instead, he got Stalin-esque rounds of applause on Dancing on Ice and a very sympathetic struggle session that Eamon Holmes had to be a part of on This Morning. And then all of that's made a big celebration of. But then these allegations, as soon as they hit, he, much like Hugh Edwards as well, decided to play the mental health card. So it seems that the incentive structures at the moment are set up where you can feign victimhood as long as you fall into one of these oppressed minority groups, the mentally ill or the members of the LGBT Rainbow Brigade, sexual political activists. And that completely expunges you of any questions about impropriety because you're useful as an avatar of the kind of politics the media would like to advance. Personally, I take it as a badge of honor that I wouldn't be invited on these sorts of channels because fundamentally, as we discussed at the top of the show, Dan, I've got quite a normal personal life. And I think that matters just as much as my unacceptable politics as to why I wouldn't be brought in the big club.
Well, indeed, because the thing is, Philip Schofield was not just the mainstream media didn't just ignore the fact that he had trashed his entire family. They actually celebrated him for it. He won awards at the Attitude magazine party as some sort of hero. And there was no thought about the consequence for his children and for his wife. But there was also no thought about the consequences on the young man who he had met at a very young age, brought into ITV, given him this job. He had stars in his eyes. He thought he was going to be a big presenter, and his life is now trashed. Now, I feel very, very strongly that people are, of course, innocent until proven guilty. You saw the completely insane witch hunt against me, which was based on absolutely nothing and has proven to be true. But again, I just look at the different ways that people treated Philip Schofield in terms of how people treated me. And it does show you that there is a real corruption, actually, at the heart of the entertainment industry.
Yeah, very much so. And I think this is also coincides with this story about Greg Wallace at the moment. Now, again, he's denying absolutely everything with both his legal advisors and, let's say, a clumsy social media video about women of a certain age. I am less interested in accusations of Greg Wallace behaving like a character from Men Behaving Badly, or The Carry-Ons, or Red Dwarf, or any of these post-sexual revolution British sitcoms which have formed the personalities of, let's say, men of a certain age, if they're in their 60s, like Greg Wallace. He might well be a bit of a lewd and crude chap, and I think that's ungentlemanly. But I do find it interesting that this has been front page news for a few days now about the culture at the BBC, whereas Philip Schofield seems that he can make a return to Channel 5, and Hugh Edwards, obviously a lot more severe case, but symptomatic of a culture at the BBC that covered up Jimmy Savile for quite a while, and then Hugh Edwards. They didn't make as big of a song and dance about that. They didn't say the need for institutional reform, as a lot of glamour feminists are about Greg Wallace's jokes. And the BBC themselves weren't outraged when Hugh Edwards didn't get any prison time despite having child sexual exploitation material. So I think they have a tendency to make larger stories to do with this witch hunt against language of sexual impropriety, but actual conduct of sexual impropriety, even when it rises to the criminal standard, when Hugh Edwards gets a little mention. And it just leaves me wondering why.
Oh, big time. Greg Wallace wasn't part of their gang. They were actually embarrassed that a bit of a crude working class guy like Greg Wallace could end up being so successful within the BBC, which is why you have seen this vindictiveness and this vengeance to cancel him without any sense of due process. And in fact, that leads me on quite nicely to number 35 on the list of the worst of 2024, which is what I have described as Strictly Come Dancing's snowflake scandal, where Amanda Abbington, aided and abetted yet again by the mainstream media, attempted to cancel the show because her dance partner, Giovanni Pinacci, had been a little bit rude to her in a couple of the training sessions. But watch the lovely interview with Krishnan Guri Murthy.
Because you start to think, well, you know, am I going mad, you know? But as, you know, I'm not mad, as you know. But yeah, it's been brutal and relentless and unforgiving.
We will talk about the play, but
yes,
I feel we have to talk about this because...
I mean, Connor, again, I want to clarify, I actually like Amanda Abbington. Amanda Abbington was very, very sound during lockdown. She was one of the few members of the entertainment establishment who was prepared to put her head above the parapet. However, I completely disagree with what she did here. She wanted to destroy this guy, Giovanni. And again, it feels like he was maybe a little bit tough on her during some of the dancing sessions, maybe made a couple of inappropriate cracks, but he was made out in the mainstream media to be some sort of criminal. It was insane, the hysteria around this.
I find these stories very just self-indulgent. Again, I've got nothing against Amanda or Giovanni. Do I disbelieve that there are divas in the media industry? I think you and I both know that's very much the case, Dan. But given the pressing nature of all of the problems in our country right now, to have stories like Greg Wallace's impropriety and edgy jokes, or a little bit of bullying behind the scenes on Strictly, which does that really need to be headline news? Does that really need some ego massaging interviews? Does that need more of an investigation into workplace culture than the BBC's reliable employment of actual predators? I would wager no, and I would think that had 2024 focused on a lot of other issues rather than make a large media circus out of those two previous stories, we would be in a lot more sensible a place.
Indeed, we would. Now, what I find so appalling about the mainstream media is their double standards. At number 34 on the worst of 2024, David Aronovich, the BBC presenter who is very much loved by the liberal establishment, suggests just a few days before Donald Trump is the victim of an assassination attempt that Joe Biden, the then president, should shoot the guy who's challenging him. I summed up the story when I was in Florida here.
BBC presenter David Aronovich has just called on X for Joe Biden to kill President Trump because he claims he is a threat to national security. Because this tweet is so insane, let me read it to you exactly. So David Aronovich writes, "If I was Biden, I'd hurry up and have Trump murdered on the basis that he is a threat to America's security. Hashtag SCOTUS," referring to today's Supreme Court ruling. Now, this is wrong on so many levels. But I think one of the things that angers me most is how is this sort of incitement to violence completely acceptable when it comes from the left? We have seen absolute hysteria. People go to prison for years and years and years for simply entering the US Capitol on January the 6th. Yet a BBC presenter can call for the assassination of Trump seemingly with no pushback from the media elite and the swamp.
And Connor Tomlinson, that was my issue with this. The hypocrisy. Because all of a sudden, folk on the left and in the mainstream media started saying, oh, just take a joke. Come on, just take a joke. He only suggested that Biden shoot Trump. It was satirical. Don't be so ridiculous. But this is the same left, the same mainstream media that will, as we've just discussed in the case of Greg Wallace, cancel people, ruin their entire reputation for a joke.
Yes, well, Dan, I think I'm not making a novel observation when I say that for them, it's not about hypocrisy, it's about hierarchy, because hypocrisy implies that they would see you as moral equals and they should extend you the same moral courtesy. They don't. They see us as an enemy faction who are standing in the way of an offense-free utopia where we all hold hands and sing John Lennon's Imagine. And therefore, because we are roadblocks on the way to that utopia, we can be driven over as if we are speed bumps. And so they don't extend us the same moral courtesy. This particular argument from Aronovich, there's two elements at play here. The first, for those who might not remember, the Supreme Court was arguing whether or not the president would have immunity from doing certain illegal activities. And many misinterpreted the ruling because what would be said is that the president would first have to be impeached by Congress before being criminally prosecuted. He can just be criminally prosecuted for something like an extrajudicial assassination or for corruption charges. And I think you're seeing this sort of legal mechanism play out right now with Joe Biden pardoning his son Hunter Biden for, let's say, an innocuous gun charge. I think it was in 2018, but the pardon stretches back to 2014 when Hunter Biden was on the Burisma board giving money to Joe Biden as the big guy. So Joe Biden's basically pardoned himself here, knowing how the Supreme Court ruling would turn out. As for the urge to assassinate President Trump, well, this is just a long pattern of the allies of the Democrats, both in the UK and US, their rhetoric leading up to the two attempted assassinations on President Trump, one that was miraculously missed by a slight tilt of the head to look at illegal immigration figures. And people say that divine providence isn't a real thing. What they mean by democracy when they call Trump a threat to democracy is a threat to the egalitarian presumption that if it weren't for divisive, racist populism setting people at odds because they notice cultural and behavioral differences between groups of people from different times and places, if it weren't for that misinformation, everyone would vote in exactly the same way because everyone is exactly the same because we're all equal and free. This is sort of liberal Marxist anthropology from the 17 and 1800s. And so they think genuinely that if you don't vote for Democrats, democracy didn't work. And so they think that anyone who isn't a Democrat, because the Democrats are acting on behalf of everyone's equal self-interest, is a threat to democracy, and they're akin to a fascist. And therefore, all you need to do is censor, silence, or shoot, in the case of President Trump, all of these threats to democracy, and we'll get that offense-free utopia. And so they see absolutely nothing wrong with encouraging political violence against their political opponents, because they have, a priori, ahead of time, defined themselves as infallibly correct. And all you're doing is getting in the way of them flat pack assembling a world that we'd actually all like to live in if we just stopped being divisive, populist racists.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. And goodness me, thinking about divine intervention, I mean, Connor, you're so right. Just a couple of millimeters and the world could look very different in 2024. It's just astonishing to think about, isn't it?
Quite. I mean, I remember where I was. I'm not old enough to remember 9/11. I think I'm just aged all of your viewers.
Me too. Goodness me.
I do remember where I was with the Trump assassination.
Yeah.
I was in the States. I just boarded a plane due back for Heathrow, and I checked my phone, I'd logged onto the Wi-Fi, and I'd refreshed my page, and within about 2 seconds ago that the video had been posted. And I just looked around the plane to see when everyone else was catching up. Some people watching CNN, some people on their phones. It was a real moment of, we didn't know whether Trump was alive or dead. We didn't know how badly he was injured. We didn't know who had fired the shot. But we didn't know at that time that poor Corey Comparator had been killed, shielding his family. We didn't know what was going to happen. And it really was a matter of, if he just hadn't turned his head at that slight angle to look at the graph, America would be in a completely different place. They wouldn't have their incumbent president. And the world, geopolitically, would be in a state of much more, it would be on the precipice of war.
Really would. It really would. And it is funny, isn't it? You think about those moments in your life, and certainly for me, the death of Princess Diana, 9/11, and then the attempted assassination on Donald Trump. And I don't think there is an image in my lifetime more impactful than that. Goodness me, what a year it could have been. Stand by. Connor Tomlinson, much more from you in just 1 minute. So don't go anywhere, because Carol Vorderman features next in the list. But first, you know how often I talk about the need for free speech to be protected, but I've been increasingly thinking of the need for personal protection from snoopers, bad actors, and hackers online. And I'm delighted to tell you I've now found the fail-safe solution. But what's more, this VPN, or virtual private network to use the full term, is also a life changer when it comes to providing you entertainment and information from anywhere in the world, wherever you are. So let me introduce you to Surfshark, an incredible and easy to use service that encrypts all your internet traffic, meaning your online activity stays safe so you can shop, stream, browse, and conduct your banking online in complete privacy. But the benefits of Surfshark go way beyond keeping you safe online. It allows you to access your favorite entertainment and news shows and channels, including to streaming services like Hulu, iPlayer, HBO Max, and Peacock. Or if your favorite show is blocked on one of your existing services, like Survivor, for me here in the UK on Netflix, but it could also be on Amazon Prime or Disney Plus, within seconds you can be watching as if you're in another country. If you're traveling for work or on holiday, you can also get all your favorite content from home, including sports. And also, this is an insurance policy against creeping censorship in many countries. For example, France has blocked Rumble for many months now. No issues if you've got Surfshark. You can watch anything, anytime, anywhere. It is true freedom. A VPN can save you money too, because you can get the best deals from websites that change their prices depending on where you're buying them from. And there are other benefits too. You can use Surfshark on unlimited devices. As you can see, I've got a few here on my computer, or your entire family can stay safe with just one subscription. And with over 3,200 servers in 100 countries, there is a world of choice at your fingertips. And if this is your first time using a VPN, there is 24/7 customer service available to you. So if you go to right now, surfshark.com/outspoken, you get an extra 4 months of Surfshark at an unbeatable price. What's more, Surfshark so confident they're the best VPN in the world that you can give it a try for a full 30 days. And if you're not entirely satisfied, you will get your money back. So go to surfshark.com /outspoken for an extra 4 months of Surfshark at an unbeatable price. Just click on the link in the description box below. But now, back to the show. Carol Vorderman's meltdown in 2024 will go down as a legend. She's off LBC now, even too left wing for the company I now describe as the Labour Broadcasting Corporation. But while she was still there, we witnessed her very, very deranged campaigning.
I cannot tell you how incensed I am, honestly, Kyle. I know I should let you speak, but honestly, I am absolutely incensed, and it has made me even more determined to do everything I possibly can to make them lose as many Conservative members of Parliament as possible in the general election through our tactical voting website. I cannot even begin to tell you. I find it a personal attack, this attack on her.
Oh, it is. It is, and it's because of her background. It's because who she is, and she's a strong woman, an absolute strong woman, and a role model for every single girl out there. And she is going to be Deputy Prime Minister, she is going to look into every single book.
I know, it's going to be fun, isn't it, Kyle?
I know, it is. See?
That deranged, moronic laugh. And Connor, guess what? It hasn't been fun at all. Carol Vorderman was in tears within weeks when her heroes decided to get rid of the winter fuel allowance. And it does show you, doesn't it, the sort of loss of all reality that comes when you become an activist rather than a journalist.
I'll never forgive you for putting me through that clip, Dan. I would like to remind Carol Vorderman that if she thinks Angela Rayner is such an incredible role model, why did she produce a son who went on to be what I can only describe as an amateur pornographer? I wouldn't shout about that mothering decision from the rooftops, and I also wouldn't trust her to run me a bath, let alone a government. I also thought, and bear in mind, when I was younger, Carol Vorderman was constantly on Countdown on the telly, which my mum, staying home as she would sit me in front of so I could learn to count. I thought Carol Vorderman was meant to be good with numbers. So it turns out the government that she's endorsed aren't so great, because we have this £22 billion black hole from the OBR, which, again, the OBR have got dodgy numbers themselves, but let's take it as a given because the Labour government want to. They think that we've got this massive black hole in public finances. And so rather than cut public spending to bring it in line with the black hole, they're going to increase public spending, which they think is going to grow the economy because it grows GDP, because government spending is factored into GDP. And so they're going to spend more public money to get us out of debt. Big question marks around that. And then if you combine the VAT rate on private schools, the Kulak liquidation policy of stealing land from small family farms, that doesn't even match last year's asylum budget, which is going to be increased because Yvette Cooper and Shabana Mahmood are going to rubber stamp asylum approval for about 70% of those on the waiting list and let them claim benefits so they can hide the true asylum costs in the undifferentiated welfare budget. So if she has campaigned for this government as a woman who is the paragon of numerical sense, I think she might want to raise some more question marks. But if she does that, despite being deplatformed from LBC, she won't get her paydays from Global, who, as Charlotte Gill has done excellent work, seem to be shill HQ in the UK for the talentless hacks acting on behalf of the Uniparty at the moment.
Yeah, Paul Brand, James O'Brien, Marina Purkis, Gemma Forte, the TV shopping presenter, they're all there. But I just want to put you through a little bit more Vorderman. Although this one's actually quite nice to watch, Connor, because you saw that sort of deranged, demonic joy that she thought she was going to have with Angela Rayner and Slippery Starmer and Rachel Thieves in power. Within weeks, it had turned to horror. Watch this.
Genuinely, I don't understand why they've done it. I do understand why you wouldn't pay the wealthy pensioners, but to go from, I'll be one of those in 2 years' time. So I wouldn't need the winter fuel allowance payment. But to go from 12 million to less than 2 million pensioners receiving it is just way too low. And I'm shocked by it because they could raise that money in so many other ways, including, for instance, private equity managers. All of this is kind of in the book, really. So, for instance, a few years ago, in one tax year, 255 private equity managers earned, very much in inverted commas, £2.7 billion between them. And they didn't pay 45% tax, as every employee who's earning a decent amount of money would pay. They have a special arrangement with HMRC at 28%. Now, that could instantly generate another 600-700 million.
So what do you think Keir Starmer should do now? Right, we've seen.
Well, I think he should apologise.
You think he should apologise?
I think I absolutely do.
So there you go, Connor. There you go. And what would an apology do anyway?
Not very much. I mean, I'm shocked that she's actually concerned about the winter fuel allowance, because I didn't know that she'd be a pensioner in 2 years, but I didn't think she could put the radiator on because I thought any heat in her house would cause her to melt. In terms of the winter fuel allowance and balancing the books, I mean, what she's failing to understand is Labour are just playing naked client politics, because they're happy to spend more on the asylum budget because they know if they rubber stamp amnesty for foreign nationals, particularly criminal foreign nationals they're letting out of prison, they're going to vote Labour. Whereas property-owning pensioners and farmers and aspirational middle-class people who put their children through private school to avoid the awful state school system, which I went to, by the way, it's bloody awful despite the best intentions of some teachers, including members of my family, they know they won't ever vote Labour, so they're going to punish and liquidate that class and hope they move into a dependent financial bracket, which would cause them to vote Labour because they promised them more benefits. So I think Carol Vorderman's only scratching her head at this move because, one, she presumed that all of the politicians that she was working on behalf of were honest. Two, because she doesn't actually understand politics and how democratic politics is actually demographic politics and you pander to certain client groups. And so I'm not shocked that she's left scratching her head. On the note of actual what they could have done else, I mean, they're already chasing thousands of millionaires out the country. We're losing more millionaires than communist China. So if they want to drive our way towards an inflation and sterling crisis, they're going the right way about it. But I actually spoke to someone who used to work in government, particularly close to the Treasury, who was frustrated by Treasury orthodoxy. And they said the very existence of the OBR actually limits the amount of money you can cut. So Labour, giving more powers to the OBR to regulate their budget, blaming Liz Truss for the financial crash when it was actually the OBR on the Bank of England, have caught themselves in a double bind because the OBR does their financial modelling on an annual basis. So that means that anything that takes an act of Parliament, which could take up to 2 years to pass through in order to reduce spending on, like on foreign aid or climate change, foreign aid being where we pay for the asylum budget, that won't be factored into annual savings. So that's been ruled out. And if you want to shrink the size of a government department, well, every government employee gets a year's severance pay. So that also won't be factored in. So the only thing you can really tweak is with pensions. And so if there's anything to do with its fuel allowance or the pension pot, Labour are inclined to do so because, one, that's the only room that they can manoeuvre to ensure that more of your money goes on foreign criminals. And two, they know the pensioners won't vote for them anyway. So they're not bothered if they're punished.
No, indeed. Do you understand, Connor, though, why a figure like Vorderman goes from being mates with all the Tories? I mean, she used to love David Cameron and turned up to all of Boris Johnson's events and would hang out with Matt Hancock at the races. Do you understand how she goes from that to this extreme hard left shill, as you put it, without any sort of understanding of how politics actually works? Do you think it is a financial motivation, or is there some sort of three-quarter life crisis going on? What's it about?
I think it's as much financial as it is narcissistic, because there are lots of people in the media space, Dan, as you well know, who just want to be on camera and get social media acclaim. They don't really care what they're saying. They'll take any old TV spot they're offered. They'll inherit their talking points from someone else just for the sake of airtime. And I do think, just by her addiction to cosmetic surgery looking at her. Carol Vorderman falls into this camp where her self-image is everything. So as long as she's on the airwaves, on camera, getting positive feedback from an incensed political tribe or a loyal viewing base, clearly not that loyal if her LBC show got cut probably for ratings, then that's what she thrives off of. I don't think there's much political strategy to her sudden pivot towards the Labour Party from politicians, by the way, in the Conservative Party that were indistinguishable from the Labour Party in Cameron, Hancock and Boris. I just think it's where the money and the attention is at. So she's moving with the political winds.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. I think you're right. And it means that there's even less reason to listen to her. But as you say, too extreme, even for LBC, that's saying something. At number 32, though, on the worst of 2024, I'm not letting him get away with it. Fishy Rishi Sunak for his selfish and disastrous decision to call the general election early to put himself out of his misery, which ended up wiping out his party for a generation or perhaps forever. Who could forget this announcement?
Can restore pride and confidence in our country, and with a clear plan and bold vision, deliver a secure future for you, your family, and our United Kingdom.
I mean, Connor, look, it's the most disastrous election campaign I can remember. The optics of that kicked off what was an appalling few weeks. But I think what annoys me is that Rishi Sunak has completely got away with it in terms of the elite class. It's a bit like, oh, he's a nice guy. His heart was in the right place. No, he didn't need to call that election. He betrayed so many good members of the Conservative Party, good MPs. And actually, if he had just waited, now look, I don't think for a moment he would have won the election, but there could have been quite a different complexion, for example, in the wake of Trump's victory.
Well, I think that the things can only get wetter speech that kicked off that campaign will go down in the history books as the single most embarrassing moment from a British political campaign to date. And that's saying a lot because David Cameron appeared in a One Direction music video. I think Rishi Sunak demonstrated how out of touch he was with the population by leaving the D-Day celebrations. Early, he thought that national service and the quadruple lock on pensions was enough to consolidate older people as a client voting bloc to stem the hemorrhaging of support to either the sofa for the majority of Northern voters or Reform UK for some of the right-wing disillusioned former Conservatives, or even people who just wanted to punish the Tories and voted Labour to get them out, which was the main reason that was actually cited for the switch from Conservatives to Labour. It's that we were just sick of the Tories and wanted rid of them after 14 years. As for Rishi Sunak, yeah, I don't get where he's got this reputation of just being a nice, affable chap from. I know they tried to astroturf dishy Rishi, excuse me while I vomit, back in the COVID days, but he is single-handedly responsible for the mass inflation we're seeing right now. He oversaw reckless printing and spending during lockdowns. He didn't come out vocally and resign, despite saying he was in principle against the lockdowns. He decided during the Palestine protests to appease the Islamists who were chanting every weekend and Wednesday for jihad, intifada, and from the river to the sea by saying that it was actually the far right that were responsible for attacking Muslim women, and he dedicated more funding to mosques, and he very callously helped sink the blade between the shoulder blades of dear old Liz Truss, which I think, frankly, had the Conservative Party stuck by her and stuck by her economic reforms and probably her subsequent Damascene conversion more towards our way of thinking, I think they would have not only retained more seats, but the country would probably be in a much healthier position right now. So in Rishi Sunak's hubris, he's basically handed over the country to 5 years of two-tier Keir and doomed the Conservative Party to electoral irrelevancy.
Indeed. No, I completely agree. And that's why he's on the list, actually, because I think he just gets away with it. It's almost like he's forgotten. But actually, so much of this is down to him because Boris's downfall, of course, is also down to Rishi Sunak. But at number 31, on our countdown of the worst of 2024, the Notting Hill Carnival turns into Notting Hill Carnage But Sly News still wants us to believe, despite the stabbing deaths of two great people, that actually this event is all fun. Watch. Oh yes, that terrible violent disorder. None of that at the Notting Hill Carnival, right? Until Sly News was struck in the face by reality.
Last hour, they've given us an update that they've made 38 arrests and recovered 4 knives. And they said a man believed to be in his 20s has been stabbed. His injuries are not life-threatening. But overall, it's been a really peaceful and enjoyable day for people.
Really peaceful, really enjoyable. Just the little stabbing. 3 stabbings now. And Connor, I'm still astonished. I'm still astonished because it's Sly News' descent into being a total propaganda outfit. I mean, we've seen it for a long time. But I felt this was like our George Floyd moment in terms of the riots in America, where there were literally buildings on fire behind the CNN reporters saying, oh, it's mostly peaceful here. There were literally people being stabbed to death. Black people, by the way, who you'd think Sly News should care about, around their reporter, but telling us it's fun. It's great fun. What a family day out the Notting Hill Carnival is. You could not pay me enough money to set foot in that carnival anymore.
Yes, well, I actually got invited on GB News to speak about this, and there was a former Met Police chap, Leroy something, who was saying, "Oh, it's a great, yeah, he was it's a great family day out. There are costumes, there's great food, and yeah, there's a little bit of crime." And I said, "Sorry, hang on a minute. Last year there were 10 stabbings. This year 2 deaths, 6 sexual assaults, and someone bit a police officer like they're a character from World War Z. I don't know of any." Let's say, far-right rallies on St. George's Day where 2 people get stabbed to death and they sexually assault police officers. If there were anything of the sort at any of the Tommy Robinson Unite the Kingdom rallies, which have so far been law-abiding and peaceful, they would be shut down instantly. And the police presence there is already pretty prominent. So I think it's just community tensions or sensitivities, or the Met Police being so petrified of being called institutionally racist again after the Macpherson report, that means that they have a double standard when policing events like this versus events that are predominantly attended by the native population. And so I just finished that GB News bit, which made the police officer laugh, and he was caught on a hot mic saying he enjoyed the debate despite feigning outrage. I just finished it with, well, if we love these carnivals so much, if we love the costumes and the jerk chicken that's served in the street, I think we can have it without the stabbings. I think we have the recipe for it. And I think that would be a wise thing to go ahead. So if you had a sane mayor of London, sane prime minister, sane Met Police commissioner, this entire life-ruining affair would be banned. Community sensitivities
and
to be
of course
down.
it should be. Of course it should be. And you're completely right to point out the 2-tier, not just policing, but also media coverage, because as you say, it would take a lot less for a Tommy Robinson march to find it at the top of the news agenda. In fact, it was at the top of the news agenda, the Uniting the Kingdom march earlier this year, even though there was no violence whatsoever. But look at that headline there from Diane Abbott in The Guardian that we just put up. 2 Notting Hill Carnival deaths is an awful tragedy, not a cheap opportunity for right-wing critics. It's right to now have debate and reflection, but these shocking events should not be exploited by bad actors. So that's all they want to do, Connor. They want to shut you down being able to talk about this. And look, we're months on now from Diane Abbott writing about that. Do you think we've had a debate? No, of course we haven't. It's just been swept under the carpet. The Notting Hill Carnival will take place again next year. It will cost taxpayers and ratepayers millions and millions and millions of pounds, and there will be more deaths, like the deaths of Cher Maximin, who was at the carnival with family and friends, including her 3-year-old daughter, and Musi Amentu, who was actually a rising star in the world of cookery and was working with Marcus Waring. So 2 people who Diane Abbott should give a real damn about, snuffed out because of the political desire to keep this terrible event going.
Yes, well, Diane Abbott can't put the right shoes on, so excuse me if I don't take her commentary with any particular weight. The only thing with Diane Abbott, and I think this is a sort of proxy for the fact that the likes of Sky News don't really care when Black people are stabbed. Diane Abbott once said that on the whole, Mao Zedong, the murderous dictator of communist China, did more good than harm. And it seems to be that Mao Zedong, despite orchestrating the deaths in the Cultural Revolution and the Great Famine of 100-odd million people, he did advance the cause of communism around the world and make China a communist superpower, so it's all right then. And I think that same attitude is taken to Notting Hill Carnival. It doesn't matter how many attendants, predominantly Black, are stabbed and killed and sexually assaulted and bitten and addicted to drugs and caught on Ring doorbells defecating in people's front gardens, which might give the community a bad rap. No. What matters is that you can't notice these behaviors because you're a racist. And so what we're going to do is we're going to turn a completely blind eye to it so we can continue using the very existence of the carnival to attack and denigrate the host population in the country that's taking place as irredeemably racist if they object to any of the behaviors. So I actually think we don't need a debate at all, Dan. I think we should just, as with all other topics these days, enforce the law in a fair and impartial way. And if any other gathering caused this predictable level of criminality, it would be banned. So I think it should just be banned
100%.
outright.
100% amen to that. Connor Tomlinson, such a joy to have you. Love you being part of Outspoken. Thank you for everything you've done in 2024. Congratulations on your engagement. Congratulations on getting your own show, both on the New Culture Forum and Lotus Eaters. And I can't wait to speak to you in 2025.
It's an absolute pleasure, Dan. Thank you for all you do as well. I hope that you've been enjoying your alternative media venture, and it's a pleasure to speak to you. Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Connor. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Thank you so much for your company today. We continue the countdown of the worst of 2024 tomorrow at 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Just before I go, though, the best way to support Outspoken is by subscribing to a monthly paid membership for access to the uncancelled after show, which returns Monday to Friday in the new year on Substack. You'll also get my exclusive reporting and columns, access to our live chats on the Substack app, and the chance to join a thriving community. Most importantly, you know this, it's a safe space, free of censorship. Your support from just £5 a month not only gives you that after show on weekdays throughout 2025, it also allows me to continue making this independent daily news show. So please do sign up, subscribe, join the independent media revolution at www.outspoken.live. I completely understand times are tough. There is an option for a free membership. I just want you to be part of our community either way. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Do hit subscribe right now if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble. Most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you.